that thou would be pleased to direct and prosper all our counsels at the advancement of thy glory, to the good of thy church, and the safety, honor, and welfare of our people. All this we ask in the name of Jesus Christ, our most blessed Lord and Savior. Amen. Amen. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all, now and forevermore. Amen.
The Senate is in session.
Messages from Her Excellency, the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor the President.
Minutes of the meeting held on Wednesday, December 9th.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the consideration of the minutes be deferred.
The question is that consideration of the minutes of December 9th be deferred. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Further announcements. I have apologies for absence today from Senators Crystal Drakes and Senator Monique Tate. Have apologies for lateness from Senator Jerome Walcott, Leader of Government Business, and Senator Kay McConney. Other announcements. We received a congratulatory message from His Excellency Mustafa Sentop, Speaker of the Grand National Assembly of the Republic of Turkey, which is their President of Parliament, and it reads as follows. I wouldn't read it in the Turkish, I shall read the English version. As we would say in Barbadian terms, I end up talking Dutch. For those youngsters who don't understand us, then you're saying things that people don't quite understand. The message reads as follows. From the Speaker of the Grand National Assembly of the Republic of Turkey. Honourable Mr. President, dear colleague, it's dated Ankara, October 5th, 2020. I'm happy to extend my sincere congratulations to Your Excellency for being appointed the President of the Senate of Barbados. On this occasion, I would like to express my wish to strengthen the existing dialogue and cooperation between our parliaments during your tenure. I would like to take this opportunity to wish you, and to you and through yourself, to all the esteemed members of the Senate of Barbados, with my deepest respect, and I extend my sincere wishes for the health, welfare, and prosperity of the friendly people of Barbados. Signed, Professor Dr. Mustafa Sentop, Speaker of the Grand National Assembly of the Republic of Turkey.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I am commanded to lay the following documents: loan contract number 5168 OCBA between the Government of Barbados and the Inter-American Development Bank on the program to strengthen public policy and fiscal management in response to the health and economic crisis caused by COVID-19. Secondly, the duties, taxes, and other payments exemption with respect to the China National Complete Implant Import and Export Corporation Order 2020. Duties, taxes, and other payments exemptions, Inotech Services Order 2020, the Value-Added Tax Refund, Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company PJSC, Masdar Order 2020, and finally the Value-Added Tax Refund in respect of the Maria Holder Trust Order 2020.
Reports from select committees, questions to ministers, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate, and moved by a minister.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 45-2 to enable us to deal with the bill today in all its stages.
The question is that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. Those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to move the first reading of the Companies Amendment Bill 2020.
The question is that this bill be read the first time. Those senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I rise on this occasion to introduce the amendment. I beg to move the first reading of the company's bills. Mr. President, I beg to move also the first reading of the Barbados Humanitarian Service Award Bill and the first reading of the Gold Award of Achievement Amendment Bill, and to be treated as a cognate debate. Okay.
Honourable Senators, the question is that those two bills so cited be read the first time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Public business, sir.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 3, in the name of the Honourable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Barbados Humanitarian Service Award Bill 2020.
Companies.
Oh, sorry, you do it, sir. Order number 5, sir.
Order number 5.
In the name of the Honourable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Companies Amendment Bill 2020.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I rise on this occasion to move the reading of an amendment to Section 175 of the Companies Act, Cap 308. It is an interesting thing that today, on the 18th of December, we are here again treating to the question of international business regulations and changes to our respective legislation, given that just a short while, 2 years ago, on the 21st of December, we, a young Senate at the time, spent an entire day well into the night, long into the night, on the 21st of December, also ensuring at the time that Barbados was in fact in compliance with the requirements of the Financial Action Task Force and the OECD, and attempting in a feverish effort to avoid further delisting and blacklisting. Mr. President, currently the issue that we're treating with is with regard to beneficial ownership and ensuring that our compliance mechanisms under CIPO, the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office, and the International Business Unit, which also has a compliance unit, that they are empowered to ensure that companies registered in Barbados, there are presently over 30,000 companies registered in Barbados, for whom legislation already exists, but we have to ensure that Barbados is in two instances: one, monitoring their compliance with the existing legislation, and two, providing the ability for the relevant agencies to both inspect and to designate relevant authorities to do so. So, Mr. President, the background to this is that under the OECD Exchange of Information on Request standard, there is a requirement that companies are able to provide accurate and up-to-date beneficial ownership information, and that information must be accessible to the relevant authorities in a given jurisdiction. In the case of Barbados, this requirement is already in place legislatively, so the companies are required to file this information. The companies are required to make their files available on request. However, what is not in place is the ability to enforce the compliance to the legislation. And what this amendment will do in this instance, Mr. President, is to ensure that the compliance unit of the International Business Unit is in a position under CIPO to ensure this beneficial ownership is met. The critical component of monitoring and regulation, Mr. President, is that the authority must be able to access the required information of which I just spoke, either by an on-site visit or on request. The amendment, therefore, to Section 175 will provide the necessary legislative backing to empower the registrar of companies to require any company to provide two sets of documents. One, anything on the books, records, or documents required to be kept by the company under the provisions of the Companies Act, or any information as the registrar may require for the proper administration and enforcement of the Companies Act. It is also important, Mr. President, that the registrar has the ability to appoint a person by an instrument in writing to examine the books, records, and other documents required to be kept by law by the company. Under this mechanism, the corporate registry will be able to utilize an entity that has already been established, which is a compliance unit in its parent ministry, the Ministry of International Business and Industry, so that they can carry out the necessary risk rating, both desk-based and on-site inspections, in order to satisfy this requirement for effective monitoring and ultimately compliance. This unit, Mr. President, has already completed necessary training. They have the expertise in-house. They have the experience as well, because it regulates the corporate and trust service providers and all companies which already fall underneath them, along with the relevant entities that fall under the International Business Division. So in this instance, the monitoring is expected to be done on a risk basis, which requires, first of all, the issuance of a questionnaire to the entire sector. This questionnaire will allow them to be rated as high, medium, or low risk, and this will determine the other actions which are necessary, namely the desk inspection review or the on-site inspection. This amendment was drafted, Mr. President, in order to allow for the legislation that is already included in the Companies and Trust Service Providers Act as the regulators for the companies to follow the same established regulatory procedures already outlined in the Act. It is simply to give effect in a practical way to what is already listed in the Act in terms of the entity. Mr. President, just also further by way of background, in February of this year, Barbados and the FATF agreed on an action plan that consisted of a number of steps which were required to strengthen Barbados' compliance and its effectiveness with regard to its anti-money laundering and terrorist financing regime. There were a number of outcomes which Barbados was required to be able to be compliant with, and especially as it related to beneficial ownership. And there are two such items that I would wish to draw to this chamber's attention. One, which is the need to establish an effective mechanism to ensure that beneficial ownership information is based on a clear understanding of the beneficial ownership declaration, which is accurate, and it is kept updated at all times for legal persons, and therefore it allows persons to subsequently demonstrate that the mechanism is adequately applied, ensure that the Financial Intelligence Unit, the FIU, and its law enforcement agencies and competent authorities have timely access to the information. The second outcome relevant to beneficial ownership requires us to introduce effective, proportionate, and dissuasive sanctions for legal persons who are failing to obtain and keep accurate and updated beneficial ownership information, and to demonstrate that these sanctions are to be applied and will be applied where appropriate. Mr. President, these proposed amendments, therefore, will fall in two categories, as I have mentioned. One, providing the teeth for the compliance unit to be able to inspect, either by on-site inspection or desk inspection, and to enable them to designate a person to do these inspections, but also the application of sanctions where the relevant documentation has not been met. Finally, Mr. President, the proposed amendments will therefore allow for the strengthening of the existing mechanisms to ensure that we are compliant. It is not a secret, Mr. President, that in the case of Barbados and many other instances over the years for small jurisdictions like Barbados and others with a low tax regime, that we have had on multiple occasions what we consider to be a moving of the goalposts, a consistent moving of the goalposts. And so we're compliant on one occasion and then we're not compliant in another instance because the goalposts have shifted. In this instance, Mr. President, we have identified through our work with the Financial Action Task Force a number of areas where there is a need for technical compliance, even though there is the legislative framework in place. And this amendment to the Act is designed for the purpose of ensuring that we can compel all of our companies, as I mentioned earlier, over 30,000 registered here in Barbados, to meet the requirements of our tax law, our Companies Act, and ultimately protecting Barbados's global reputation as a jurisdiction of substance, a jurisdiction that is compliant with global tax law, and a jurisdiction that is committed to efficient, effective, and sharing of information under the relevant global arrangements with whom we partner. And so with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. Senator Franklin.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I have no intention of delaying the Senate on the particulars of this bill. I have no difficulty with them. The thing is, my concern happens to be the poor workers who have to work at KIPO and a lot of other government departments, but we're dealing with KIPO now, so let me talk about them. I remember prior to this government taking office, there was a request for more staff at the Corporate Affairs and the Intellectual Property Office. The work was killing them because the last administration required or changed the law so that every company in Barbados had to file returns every year. And there was the same amount of staff. When you go to the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office, the lines were going through the door. And there was they are down a long corridor. And this government came in, didn't know what the hell they were doing, and sent home people. Corporate Affairs needed more staff. They had about 50 at the time. They sent home 10, or 9 or 10. The work wasn't being done because they put too much work on the people, and the government decided they're going to send home people. And so they just took names out of a hat or something and sent home people from Corporate Affairs. I don't know how they did it. Corporate Affairs needs staff. You cannot ask people to work and doing 2 jobs the same day. People are supervising themselves, doing work. The supervisor go and work as cashier sometimes because he ain't got nobody to do it. But he got to check the money that the cashier brings in, you know. So this is now another imposition on the staff at Corporate Affairs. And mind you, it's not a lot, but each time you put a little straw on the camel's back, eventually, one last straw. It is a public service thing now. All over the public service, because of IMF dictates, people have cut back on the amount of people they need. They needed them. That's why they had them in the first place. Corporate Affairs needed more, and you give them less, and then send home some. So, sir, if we are going to have effective monitoring of the provisions of this legislation, you have the bodies to do it. They don't have the bodies. You are killing the people at Corporate Affairs, and as I said, in a lot of other government departments, but we deal with Corporate Affairs now. I should probably declare an interest here. And my members? Yes. But I'm guided by you, thank you. They're members of my union. And so my job here, not only as the person that speaks for the opposition, but I had to double up now and speak for members of my union here. Sir, As I said, no difficulty with the provisions of the bill. I understand what the government is doing, because every so often the OECD and everybody else change the goalposts. Barbados is compliant, and then next thing you know, they'll find another reason to make us non-compliant because they want the business in Europe. And they are less compliant than everybody else. Their jurisdictions out there, they have so much money laundering in those international capitals, and if $36,000 passed through Barbados, you know, it is a big thing where they launder millions and millions daily. But I understand the thing. They don't have any responsibility for these countries anymore. They're not their colonies anymore. So you got to swim with the sharks and hope to survive. And Barbados has been trying to survive every time. And I must say that the government has been doing only what it can, because if you fail to jump through those hoops, the business wouldn't come here. So I said, sir, no problem with the bill. I just need help for the people who are going to monitor the provisions of the bill, not only this, but several other pieces of legislation. I'll speak to them at a more appropriate time. But all over the public service, the staff are crying out. You sent home people when you didn't have enough to also meet requirements of another international agency. And it is, we can have on the people who work in the public service. And sir, my dad says, we can have a on me because they complain to me. So I'm in support of the legislation. I'm not opposed to it. I'm not going to fight it. All I want is the government to be cognizant of the fact that the work cannot be done by itself. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Senator Franklin. Any other speakers on this matter? Senator Holder.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. I rise this morning to make a very short intervention on this bill before us. My short is going to be a lot shorter than yours. Don't worry. I don't think, I haven't heard the leader of opposition business that any one of our members today would oppose this amendment. We appreciate and understand that this is necessary. As the acting leader of government business indicated, we, as a very small jurisdiction, have to ensure that we maintain compliance with the international regulators. It reminds us always that we are not an island, believe it or not, even though we're an island. So we're not alone, and we have to comply, because we all know that if we do not comply with these international regulators, that there are ramifications really for us as small jurisdictions. So we, I believe, can agree to that. But as I look at the amendment being proposed, Mr. President, it brought to mind the need really for us within the private sector to appreciate and understand the importance of strengthening how our businesses are set up here on island, and strengthening the reporting requirement for these firms. We heard earlier that there are approximately 30,000 firms registered. As I stand here, I can tell you, Mr. President, that approximately 1/3 of that number is actually operational today. So I think that this amendment, given the CAIPO and their compliance unit the ability to conduct on-site visits and also to request additional information from firms, will help us here to have a better appreciation of the number of businesses that are actually operating on the island. Beyond the international compliance, domestically, that we have a better picture of really what the state of play is within the private sector here on island. A lot of these businesses, Mr. President, a lot of these registered firms along the way have gone out of business. But we have no real sense and no real way of determining that, of quantifying that. So I think that strengthening the registrar and his or her ability to conduct these visits and to be able to request additional information will help us in having a better picture of what really obtains here for us. And then secondly, and attendant to that, is that if we know for the fact that we have maybe a little over 10,000 formal businesses that are operating, it helps for sure with our international reporting, because then we don't have to account for this huge number that we know. A lot of them are not in operation at this time. So I think that is a good step. So this is my first point. Secondly, Mr. President, we're talking about beneficial ownership, and I know that when this information is shared across the various publics, there will be some trepidation, there may very well be some concern by business owners, by shareholders, and even directors. With this, I can sense that there will be the fear, is government looking to come into my business? Is government looking to intrude into the operations of the firm? I want to suggest that is not the case. I am happy that the leader of government business talked about the risk assessment that will be done, because I suspect, Mr. President, that when that risk assessment is actually done on our firms, we're going to see that the majority of businesses operating on island are actually considered low risk based on the international standard. They are considered low risk, and because of that, I suspect that we are not going to see the need really, for the compliance unit to maybe follow up with them and collect that information from them and such like, because of the fact that they don't really present any significant risk to our island and to our reporting. So I don't think that there's a need for fear. I suspect, as I said, in looking at what the bill proposes, that persons are going to become a little fearful, but there's no need for that. I believe strongly that here is an opportunity for us to ensure at the level of the firm that you're compliant. We know that we have a challenge right now with the annual filing of firms. It's a fact. We have a challenge with that right now. Mr. President, yourself, wearing another hat in an earlier life, understand this very well, because you're the organization that you would have been a part of for some time, had on many occasions during the year to sit with business owners, to organize clinics, collaborating with other BSOs across the private sector to help them to appreciate the importance of that annual filing. It helps us, as I said, to have that true perspective of what is happening within the firm. But I think that for the firm, though, we've not maybe spoken to this as much, but for the firm, it is also important, because we know that we hear the point being made often that businesses are not keeping records as they should, and I think that the focus really here is those firms that gross about $1 million or less, and based on that definition, Mr. President, we're really talking about small firms, because the Small Business Development Act defines the small firm as grossing up to $2 million per annum with paid capital of $1 million and under 25 employees. So we're really talking about small firms. And so here is an opportunity, in my view, to help this sector to put the systems in place in their operations to make sure that their business model is not only compliant, but the business model reflects the kind of good governance framework that is needed within our operations, within our firms today. I think that this is going to help that process. I heard the point from Senator Franklin about staffing issues, and I am satisfied that the government is attending to this and will ensure that the department will be well staffed to be able to take care of this. But I want to send a clear message to the private sector and the small business sector in particular that we have to consider our models of operation. We must consider our models of operation. And what do I mean by that, Mr. President? We have a lot of firms that have moved, yes, from the sole proprietorship model and the sole proprietorship framework, legal framework, to incorporation. And we actually encourage that because you're able to shift liability from the individual to this company, okay? This company that we know is recognized in law as a person, if you will. So you're able to shift the liability. We encourage that you need to move from just the sole proprietor model to incorporation, if only for the sake of moving liability and shifting liability from an individual and having the right kind of structure for this environment. But, Mr. President, I have found over time that a lot of incorporated entities have not been able to set up the board of directors, move to the next stage now where you set up a board of directors, where you attract persons now with competence and with skills that can help you to take the business to the next level. And I'm saying that we need to get there. That's the truth. We need to get there. We need to go from well, it's not informality, but it is a system that we've become accustomed to, a culture, where you just have these one-person directors or maybe two-person directorships, and we are unable to draw on the capacity and the competency of professionals helping us at the level of the board to govern our operations. And so the business many times fails to move to that level of sophistication that is needed to become competitive and to sustain competitiveness. Now, this is a conversation, Mr. President, that I know a lot of us don't like to have and don't want to have. But the truth is, we must have it. We must have it because we have to be able to get our private sector moving along the growth trajectory. From, yes, informal to becoming formal, and even when they become formal, to be able to strengthen their governance and to be able to put those systems in place that allow for the kind of enhanced competitiveness of the operation that we want to see and the kind of growth strategy that we want to see and that can be sustainable. So this is a conversation that we must have. And especially, Mr. President, at a time when we are thinking now about establishing that junior market, that we can be able to raise equity for small firms. We know that we have billions of dollars, I'm told the data suggests, in our financial institutions. Yes, so I take that point that the credit union has. I spoke with the credit union last time, not going there today, right? But we do have, and so we need to be able to unlock some of this capital to help finance small firms. So I support, Mr. President, moving towards that junior market. We started before. I know that there have been some efforts in the past, but we've not been able to successfully roll out this regime. Our sister country, Jamaica, they've been a little more successful at it than we have. But I think that we can get there. But in order to do so, It means being able to identify businesses that we can take through that diagnostic process. We can help them to put in place, that governance framework that is needed for them to be able to trade. That is going to change, Mr. President, the culture that we are accustomed to. And that culture of secrecy. You don't want anyone to know what is going on in the operations, and you hold it close to your chest because of the fear that if you expand your board of directors, people are going to come and steal proprietary information and so on. There's a culture there that we have, I believe, Mr. President, to address. A culture of mistrust. There is a culture of mistrust. And so this is why I said earlier that I spoke to a few accountants from the accounting body here, even coming into this session to get us a feel for their perspectives on this amendment. And they support. This is good. This is a good step where the government is going. Granted, one might argue you don't have much of a choice because you have to comply with the international standards, right? But we must have that conversation. The issue of mistrust. It is a part of our culture. Yes, I will hasten to add that along the way, there have been some justifiable reasons for why some directors and even shareholders might be a bit trepidatious with, particular investments and the like. We know of the stories, Mr. President, of persons seeking capital from a particular place. The application, the proposal was rejected, oftentimes without any supporting information, but then the idea turns up somewhere else. Somebody has been able to take that idea, and you see the exact and identical project being implemented by some other firm a few weeks or months down the road. So we know of those stories. And I hear them often in the profession that I'm in. But I also counter by suggesting that we may need to simply tighten up on our contractual arrangements. Introduce non-disclosure agreements, for example, when you're sharing information with potential investors and so on. There are ways that you can address these issues. But the fact is, we cannot allow those circumstances and those situations that are in the minority, those few occasions, to affect our ability as a sector from moving to a more sophisticated regime in the way that our businesses are structured and the way that our businesses operate. So I make the point that this will help, Mr. President, in being able to quantify the firms that are operating here on island. It will help in moving the conversation along relative to businesses being, better structured, putting their governance framework in place and so on. I think this will help. And as we move towards that junior market, I think that it will help as well in that cultural shift that is needed relative to the fear of persons having proprietary information and so on. Because we need to get there. We need to get there. And I'm going to be the first. Mr. President, I said it won't be long, so I said it won't. I began with saying it won't be long, so I'm going to wrap up. I know the leader of business wants to bring this to a closure. But I will be the first, Mr. President, to admit that I'm always advocating, yes, for the sector. I'm a strong lobbyist for our small business community and being able to access capital and so on. But I want now to share as well that the time has come for the public at large to get involved in helping to build out this sector. That the truth is, it cannot just be the government, right? I know some persons are smiling hearing that coming from me, but it's a fact. It cannot just be the government. Yes, we expect the government to help at the micro level and those that can at least fend for themselves and so on. But as we're able to help with the development of that sector, that it gets to a point where we know we have a cadre of firms that are internationalizing their operations, that they've gotten to that stage. Then the public has to get involved in being able to provide the equity for them, being able to help them access the capital to go to the next level. And the only way that is going to happen is if we're able, as they said, to build into the operations of these entities that transparency and that governance framework, where we encourage our small firms, yes, to attract persons to serve on their boards. And, we have these firms keeping proper records of the operations, recruiting the kind of skill sets that are needed to help them to do so. This is going to help, I think, in building confidence in the sector. So, Mr. President, I support the amendment. I believe that it is a step in the right direction relative to helping us to quantify our firms. And as I close, I share this final thought that when we worked on the MSME policy, this is the final thought, Senator Caswell. When we worked on the MSME policy a few years ago, approximately 3 years ago, it was envisioned that we would have a regime where there would be at least, not an annual, but I think it was every 2 years, firms would be requested to update their information with the ministry. And we had looked at what obtained in the UK. I think in the UK they have it for 1 year. Every year you must update that information. And it was intended, Mr. President, in this policy for us to be able to do so. Why? Because you want to get a sense of, how many firms are really operating. And had we maybe gone that route then, had we started that, I think that by today we would have a better sense of the numbers, and therefore the 30,000, we would appreciate that. That is maybe not the reality of what it is today, because we would have gone through that process and we would have started that process to be able to remove a lot of those that have fallen off, that are no longer operating. The shareholders and our directors have passed, and a whole number of reasons. And so to be able to have a more accurate registry of firms. So, Mr. President, again, I commend this amendment and give it my support, and I remain obliged to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Holder. Senator Hunt.
Thank you, sir. I promise I will be succinct in my contribution. Recent events in and on the labor relations front of Barbados have caused me to think fairly deeply about the future of the administration of labor relations in Barbados, and indeed the Caribbean. And as I look through the proposed amendment to the Companies Act, I was mindful of some concerns which I've had and continue to have as a practitioner of labor relations in Barbados. And now the scope of my professional operation is now limited to Barbados once again. I see what has been proposed, particularly the amendment to the insertion of Section 448A as what is going to be, whether other industrial relations practitioners recognize it at the current moment or not, but it's going to be a necessary building block, essential to constructing a future realistic and efficacious labor relations management model for this country. I can speak from personal experience. I can speak from the experience shared by other trade union negotiators, and one senator who spoke before me is a practicing trade union negotiator. The shared experience has been that sometimes when negotiating with corporate entities, particularly those that are part of a group of companies, you will find that the company where the bargaining unit exists is the company which carries all of the costs. The companies which, when you ask to have evidence of the employer's claim of being unable to pay what the trade union is requesting on behalf of the workers, if they do agree to share information, it is largely anecdotal. It anecdotally supports their claim of inability to pay. And negotiators on the other side really have no realistic means of forcing what should be a reasonable expectation to have disclosure, which can then serve as a basis on which to make an informed decision about how a negotiation should go. There have been periods of examining companies' books when negotiators would have seen that certain costs which have been reported were directed in the direction of some management company. Now, it appears as a legitimate cost. The effect that it has is that it reduces profitability. Sometimes it erases profitability. And if a trade union is looking to get salary increases or more benefits which have to be paid for out of profits, the payment of certain management fees, the amount of which may not be reasonable, it certainly erodes a company's capacity to do as a trade union is requesting. Close examination often leads to the discovery that the management company to which the entity that employs the unionized workers must pay, that management company is owned by the same persons that own the unionized company. So that, in effect, the owner of those management companies fit the definition provided by the FATF of beneficial owner. Those persons who exercise ultimate effective control over a legal person or arrangement over the company that is there facing the negotiator. Recently, we have heard the cries of Barbadian workers who've had to take to the streets to lament their inability to get severance payments that they are entitled to. And in turn, we've been hearing from some employers that they're unable to pay. In some instances, some employers are indeed unable to pay. They cannot afford it due to the legitimate effects of the global pandemic, the drying up of their source of revenue. But on the other hand, there are also companies which can present themselves as being unable to pay because they've scuttled away their profit. And it causes other persons sensitive to the needs of workers in Barbados to ask the question, should we not now be thinking about a regime of labor relations management where once a company is claiming its inability to meet its legal obligations to workers, that they should be obligated to account for what they have done with their profits during the years of profitability. They should be made to show where the retained earnings went. To my mind, the objectives of Section 448A, as proposed by the government, will empower future negotiators faced with situations such as we're seeing played out in Barbados to have a basis on which to contribute to the refashioning of a better way of administering labor relations in Barbados. Essentially, although when one thinks of the Companies Act, it may not be obvious what benefit to trade unionists, what benefit to trade unions may be contained here. But what I see is the potential for trade unions and those others who are charged with administering labor relations in Barbados to use what this bill offers to create a system where the playing field can be made more level in a way that will benefit the workers of Barbados. And on that basis, sir, I am happy to support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Hunt. Senator Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon to my colleagues in the Senate. And here we are towards the end of the year, sir. What a tumultuous year. I'm thankful that we are here, and I will get to the debate at hand in due course, sir, but look at where we are. Earlier in this year, we were debating how we would stand the test of the incursion of the virus, how we would find the resolve within the nation to hold strain. I think, the fact that we're actually here debating legislation on beneficial ownership, all things considered, at the end of 2020, that's a pretty good place to be, Mr. President. And I think, just for a moment, just to express a little gratitude that is where we find ourselves today. So, sir, the concept of beneficial ownership is one which, as an attorney, is an enjoyable prospect. And it goes against certain legal doctrines with regard to the separation between a company and an individual. So the whole purpose of a company was to create a separate legal entity. The concept of a beneficial owner to such a company, sir, somewhat attaches to the principle, yet seemingly erodes that separation which was established in Solomon and Solomon. But I digress, sir. Sir, we understand the need for beneficial ownership declarations, certainly for the purpose of chasing, as I tell my daughter, baddies, persons who seek to do naughty things while utilizing the structure of these companies, sir. And also for tracking those who take certain civil missteps. So while there may not be the range of indulging in nefarious activities as drugs or guns or smuggling, there are those who seek to use these hallowed shores for certain civil misfeasance. And the concept of having a beneficial ownership declaratory regime is one of the tools to reduce such activity, Mr. President. So the aim of the legislation is certainly one that is understood and appreciated. The registrar's powers, sir, are quite vast and should certainly give the necessary legal backing for any of the proposed steps. And what is important, I think, is that Section 448, which is proposed, be implemented and be implemented in a manner sooner rather than later. Because we have seen many times that legislation is passed, but the subsidiary legislation to give effect to the legislation remains in the wastelands. Those of us who practice in the field of bankruptcy, sir, are still awaiting the bankruptcy regulations, which I understand are being worked on very heavily. And I believe that act, sir, is from 2011. But if we look at Section 448 as proposed, the registrar may, in furtherance of paragraphs E, issue guidelines on the application or interpretation of the term beneficial ownership. And while this is, and the reason this is important, sir, is that we need to have a clear threshold with regard to which type of entity is going to be subject to this level of scrutiny. So there is this, I think, this wrong concept that there is a lack of sophistication within the Barbadian populace, sir. And I am quite sure that there are many Barbadians who have taken advantage of the tax benefits which were provided earlier in this administration to the utilization of corporate structures to have holding companies. So now we need to be sure that whatever level of beneficial ownership which is attached to the requirement for the identification and, of course, the reporting requirement, sir, is not one which is going to be so onerous that you attract these, what I call these regular companies, which are set up for simple purposes. In other words, Mr. President, for whatever reason, you may choose to incorporate a company to buy a parcel of land. Let's say the parcel of land is valued at $150,000. You utilize the company for whatever structure you believe is necessary for your family or for your own investment purposes. For an entity like that, should there be a requirement that you have to list the beneficial owner? Similarly, if I'm a small business as set out by Senator Holder, what is the threshold? Because already we are nudging our small business practitioners to the level of sophistication that we need, but we have to make sure that whatever level the registrar sets is one that will not add to the already demanding compliance regime for company holders. I myself, sir, have a very small company and found myself, having not filed the corporate, the annual return for a period of 2 years, having to pay a hefty fine. And that is something which I had to learn the hard way for whatever reason. So these are the type of things which we have to consider. So certainly, sir, it is a step in the right direction. We just need to ensure that when Section 448A is implemented, that the registrar is given the necessary guidance and assistance with regard to setting that threshold, and then ensuring that there's dialogue with the relevant stakeholders with regard to setting that threshold, the expectations of those who fall within the realm of that threshold, and what it means for the cost of business. Because at the end of the day, we know that these costs are not retained. They're never retained, sir. They find their way forward. I actually had an exercise, and I digress a bit, where I found myself paying for a paper bag, Mr. President. Now, Barbados was awash in plastic bags, and it was killing all these sea turtles, and these sea turtles felt better when you paid for the bag that was killing it, as opposed to when you're just killed by a free bag. So the concept now, Mr. President, that you had to pay for a brown paper bag, which we used to get at the supermarket, Mr. President, if you recall, quite freely a few years back. It just shows these costs are never retained by an organization. So using that somewhat naughty example, sir, we will see that the costs which are incurred by companies who have to deal with the beneficial regime will be passed on. So the aim is to ensure that whatever that threshold is set under Section 448, that is one that does not have the impact on the small business or the regular holding companies which have been established for tax or family benefits. Now, sir, there's another limb to my discussion today, and it's that the OECD has stipulated, and I'm referencing, sir, for the benefit of the House, the OECD Beneficial Ownership Toolkit, which was issued in March 2019, sir. And those who want to take a peek to see the machinations referenced in there, sir, can spend a few hours having fun. But what the OECD has said is this simply: it is not enough to have a compliant legal framework, but that the laws must be effectively implemented and enforced in practice. So this is but one step. We are now faced with the obligation, having had the laws passed, and hopefully it will pass, sir, that it must be effectively implemented and enforced in practice. The proof of the pudding remains in the eating, sir, in the resources being given to the registrar to be able to conduct her task. Resources not just in terms of financial allocation, but personnel allocation, and sophisticated personnel, sir, so when they turned up to the company in question, that they're able to deal with the accountants who the company has and answer the questions and ask the probing questions, sir, with regard to the company structure. And we have the resources in this country with the number of talented Barbadian and Caribbean students that are being churned out by the university, Mr. President. The question is, do we have the financial resources and already strained implementation and heavily borrowing for the need just to survive this pandemic to ensure that we make sure it is effectively implemented and enforced? Because this could all be for naught. If we pass the legislation, we have the reference to the goalpost continuously moving, and they say, well, you've passed it, but you have not implemented it. So I would, of course, look forward to hearing from the minister with regard to how the implementation will be considered in the context of the strained financial and realistic proposition that we're dealing with. Mr. President, quite simply, no one is going to sit here and say, you have to do it, it must be done, find the money from somewhere. I was told by a retired politician from the BLP administration that there was a cabinet discussion one time, and there were these lovely legal ideologies being proposed. And the Prime Minister at the time looked at the gentleman who was making these lovely legal proposals, and then looked at his Minister of Houses and said, how many houses can I build with that money? And that was the end of the proposal, sir. So we understand that there always comes back to the practical needs of the country in 2020. We agree that the aim is a positive one, but let us be careful that we ensure that the implementation is done. Now, with regard to the implementation, just 2 or 3 further points, Mr. President. Firstly, this does not provide for the trust organizations which exist. So these trust organizations, and this is a subject which the OECD has also considered, I don't see reference to them here, and that may be a subject for discussion on another time. Trust entities are quite sophisticated, sir, and can achieve probably even better than a company can some of the objectives that are being sought to be enforced by this legislation. Secondly, sir, there will be a requirement for a registry for the beneficial owners. Now, we have seen, sir, that the concept of a registry and who has access to information is one which causes a certain amount of reticence. A proposed solution, sir, that I have seen, same document which I referred to earlier, sir, was that in the Isle of Man, what they did is that they limited access to the registry to the regulators, who would then utilize the registry for any subsequent investigation. That will then therefore stop any, dare I say, malicious person, sir, from having access to information which should be kept within a certain amount of security. And then finally, sir, the question is the need for digitization. And are we adding another layer to government functionaries who are already struggling to keep up with their basic demands? Those of us who know, sir, are aware of the time taken for searches, are aware of the time taken for ensuring that documentation has been provided with regard to charges. So legal charges priority, all these are issues which need to be attended and which have to be put in place, sir, to ensure protection for the lending institutions and the various organizations which rely on the information. If we have a scenario where another layer is added to the obligation, we need to look at what do we do with the available resources to ensure the implementation through the utilization of digitization. Our registry has taken steps with regard to doing certain online searches, but there's still a caveat because the system has not been fully integrated. So when you go online, there's a big waiver saying, well, what you're looking at here, we can't guarantee because of updates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The implementation is necessary, but we need to ensure we don't know where we're going to get the resources from, that the core functionality of these registries is not further impacted by any new obligation if we have not provided the necessary resources for it to be done. But sir, all these caveats aside, we understand the purpose for the legislation, and it's one which I have no hesitation in supporting. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Boyce. Any other speakers? Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wish to acknowledge the contributions made by my colleagues, senators, starting with Senator Franklin, who raised the issue of staffing at KIPO, and I'm sure that even in the contribution made by Senator Boyce, that he raised a similar issue on the adequate staffing of the facility. But I would wish to point out at this time, as I said earlier, that the compliance unit, which is already established in the International Business Unit of the Ministry, is already staffed with the expertise, with the skills, and it is that entity that will be designated by the registrar to conduct these inspections. I mentioned that in my opening statements, and I would wish to just draw it to my colleagues' attention. Senator Holder obviously gave a detailed and a well-articulated presentation on the relevance of this legislation and the importance of us nudging, in the words of Senator Boyce, the small business sector even further forward and bringing them into a level of sophistication that would allow them to expand even further. And I want to respond to Senator Hunt also before I come back to some of the comments which were made by Senator Boyce. Senator Hunt spoke about the regulations, particularly under Section 448A as it relates to the definition of beneficial ownership, and I wouldn't go into the definitions and how that is treated to, but then he made reference to the labor component of that and the recent issues that we have seen here in Barbados, and I would want to spend a moment on that particular issue. The first thing I would want to say, Mr. President, is that there is no question in anyone's minds that the importance of beneficial ownership identification is critical, and the amendment allows the relevant agencies to be able to do just that. In fact, it also goes on to ensure that the documentation provided by way of these books and its filings is monitored by way of on-site inspection and desk inspections by the compliance unit to which I referred earlier. And so the ability of a company then to present its documentation and to have that documentation reviewed, inspected, and then if it is not compliant with the legislation, to have them penalized by way of the penalties that are outlined in this legislation, they do speak to some of the issues that were raised by Senator Hunt. On the question of the labor industrial and industrial relations issues for severance, just to point out that already enshrined in the existing Severance Payments Act 2020, which we amended earlier this year, there is a requirement for employers to demonstrate the inability to pay, and there are references in the Severance Payment Act into the various sections which speak to insolvencies, bankruptcy, and making the books available in order to demonstrate that you are unable to satisfy an employee claim. Whereas in the conversation, unfortunately, it has unfortunately been presented as if there is an automaticity to the severance payment being made by an entity other than the employer, when in actual fact there has to be a demonstrated inability to so do, and that has been made clear even in the current labor environment. But I want to make a point here on this occasion, because I think I've said it before and it has been reported, but I want to make it clear in this instance. There is no question that in the context of a global pandemic that many companies have struggled. There is no question in the context of the global pandemic that many companies have been unable over the past 10 months to earn revenue, and therefore on that basis have been unable to satisfy what would ordinarily have been their obligations by law. The government has made it clear that in those circumstances that the government will go after recovering any expenditure that is made under the National Insurance Scheme through the Severance Payments Fund, up to 75% recovery from the employer under those circumstances, and we have made that very clear. In some instances where there are legal recourses available to the government has also publicly indicated a willingness to do so. And why is that, Mr. President? Because we are an administration that is very clear that even as we treat to the importance of companies and the importance of managing how companies deal with its finances, we are also a government that sees the importance of labor and to whom people must matter, and for whom we will take the responsibility of ensuring that people are able to meet their basic needs and their obligations on a day-to-day basis, and we will deal with companies in a different way, in a legal way, through the relevant legislation after the fact. And that has been the case, Mr. President. But there is a caveat that I want to make here. We have seen some instances where persons who have not engaged with their labor union, persons who have not gone to their management of their companies, persons who have not gone to the labor office, persons who have not come to any of the agencies who are rightfully responsible for dispute settlement, have found themselves preying, I would have to call it, preying on the sympathies of the public. In some instances where they are being stirred up to do so, and I have said it on another occasion, this is not the moment where we use people's suffering and their want and their struggles for political strife. This is not that moment. And there are established dispute settlement mechanisms that are there. And for any of those persons who have bypassed every single one of them, even to the extent that they have not even spoken to their own employers, but they have taken to the streets, I say shame on you. There are provisions in place, and we are here. We have met with almost every single entity, certainly as it relates to the tourism sector. Senator Grant is here, and he can attest to what I'm saying in his own right as president, as CEO of the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association. And in every single instance where there are legitimate and understandable concerns about the payment of severance, we have met with almost every single entity, if not all of them, over the last few weeks, Mr. President. And we have seen the pain as recently as earlier this week. We've met with one group, and there were colleagues from my own office who had to excuse themselves, Mr. President, from the room because it was such an emotional and painful experience to see what people are going through. There is no question that this administration is here for that, Mr. President. There's no question that this administration historically has dealt with capital. So we have dealt with the owners, we have dealt with the managers, and this administration equally so, in particular on this occasion in tourism, is also bringing our workers to the table and ensuring that we speak with them as well. But there are those to whom we have had to express concern about the way in which they have conducted themselves. There are legitimate concerns, yes. We're treating to those. But there are others that keep being repeated often and often and often in the public space where people simply don't really realize what is happening. And I say that this is an important consideration, Mr. President, because we are talking all the time about crime, and we hear people make loose statements about young people this and people escalating. I think young people say going from 0 to 110 seconds flat and not having effective conflict resolution in place. When we have professionals, leaders, established persons in our society failing to use conflict resolution and dispute settlement mechanisms and instead going from 0 to 110 seconds, you have to ask the question why, Mr. President. And I say that here and I say no more. But to close, Mr. President, Senator Boyce made important points as it relates also to the importance of trust, the importance of the OECD regime. And I want to make the point here that Barbados has prided itself on being compliant with international tax regulations. We have spent significant time, resources on the reform of our regulatory regime. Certainly since 2018, I believe we passed maybe I think 18 pieces of legislation on one occasion, Mr. President, in order to ensure that we are brought up to speed, and we have continued to ensure that we are brought up to speed. When we find ourselves blacklisted, Barbados has not just responded, but Barbados has also been proactive. And we have continuously engaged with the OECD, with the Financial Action Task Force, and we have continued also to make the point, Mr. President, that Barbados is a small island state, and therefore this one-size-fits-all regime does not necessarily apply. But where we have a voice and a seat at the table, we will contribute to the drafting of rules that ensure the highest standards of tax compliance. And with those words, Mr. President, I beg to move that, Your Honor, that we do know, that this bill now be read a third time.
Second.
A second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. The question is that this bill be read a second time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate dissolves itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Honourable Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that Clause 1 do stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Deputy President, I move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
I beg to move that Clause 3 stand part.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the Chair the passage of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. All senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the
Third time.
that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, no, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Companies Amendment Act 2020.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be so cited. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Order number 3, sir. In the name of the Honourable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Barbados Humanitarian Service Award Bill 2020.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the Barbados Humanitarian Service Award Bill and the Gold Award of Achievement Bill 2020 be treated as a cognate debate?
The question is that the two bills so cited be treated as one debate. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Senator Cummins, you may proceed.
Mr. President, I want to begin my presentation today by reading from a document. It's actually found on the Centers for Disease Control site, and it reads as follows. This flu killed an estimated 50 million people worldwide, including an estimated 675,000 people in the United States. An unusual characteristic of this particular virus was the high death rate, and it lowered the average life expectancy in the United States by more than 12 years. A comparable death rate globally has not been observed during any of the known flu seasons or pandemics that have occurred prior to this particular pandemic. Its unique severity puzzled researchers for decades and prompted questions such as why it was so deadly, where did it originate from, what can the public health community learn from this virus to better prepare for and defend against future pandemics. Mr. President, we're talking in this instance about the 1918 Spanish flu outbreak. And in many ways, when you read the literature on what happened in 1918 and the 45 years that ensued until a vaccine was subsequently introduced for the Spanish flu, we think we're talking about what we have experienced. I think Senator Boyce spoke earlier about where we started in 2020 and where we are now ending. We started in 2020 with no concept of anything other than a new flu virus found in Asia, which subsequently made its way all across the world with no exceptions. We found ourselves, and we are here now at the end of 2020, Mr. President, dealing with millions dead globally on a daily surging rate, in particular in the United States. And researchers are working feverishly to roll out vaccines and therapeutics and to be able to deal with the devastating impact on every single economy in every single corner of the world. Large, small, developing, developed, industrial, agrarian, services-driven, there has been no exception, Mr. President. We are talking in 2020 not about the Spanish flu, not about a new strain of H1N1 as at 1918, but we are speaking on this occasion, Mr. President, about the COVID-19 pandemic, which has ravished the global community. But Mr. President, even as we speak about what has happened in COVID-19 and we talk about the public health crisis, we talk about surging death rates, we talk about the persons who are vulnerable and have comorbidities, we talk about also the opportunities that have presented itself for therapeutics and researchers to find a solution to what we're dealing with. These are all the negative and the devastating consequences. But out of great crisis, out of great trial, often comes great triumph. And great triumph in this instance, Mr. President, is to be found in the background for these two awards. We have seen a virus that is anti-community, anti-people. It teaches you to separate from those that are close to you. It teaches you not to touch. You can't hug. You can't embrace. There's no gathering. It has taken that sense of community and togetherness from us. But it has not taken the spirit of community, Mr. President. And that is the basis of what we are now presenting today as a Humanitarian Service Award. Out of this great trial, we have seen the triumph of the human spirit. We have seen people from high and low, far and near, stand up and say, I am willing to serve my community, I'm willing to serve others in a way that in instances where I can be in danger, I am willing to take that risk and I am standing up and I'm saying, here I am, use me. We're talking here oftentimes, Mr. President, about our public health officials who have been widely lauded, widely commended, and they still are standing up every single day at the front line of service to our country. But simultaneously, there are so many others that many do not see. On November 30th, Mr. President, we spoke about and we recognized as we sat in National Heroes Square many medical professionals who needed to be recognized. We weren't talking just about those persons who work at Harson's Point or at Enmore in the early days, or at Paragon, or now at St. Lucie District Hospital. We're talking about people, Mr. President, many of whom I know well from a different hat which I wore at the time, who went out to sea on small boats run by the Coast Guard, met ships away out at the horizon, Mr. President, dressed in full protective gear, climbed a small ladder as the pilot from a ship would normally do under our pilotage legislation, and they boarded a ship, in some instances suspected of having COVID cases, active COVID cases potentially on board. They went ashore, took those swabs that were new in many instances to persons, climbed back down that ladder out at sea, brought those swabs in, took them to the Dos Santos laboratory, had them tested, and then they communicated. We saw people who could not imagine before doing much more than walking up the gangway and going to see a person who was ill on board a ship. We saw persons who found themselves stranded in countries far and near. I remember there were those who were stranded in some instances as far as South Africa. There were people when there was a no-sail order issued on the 27th of February who were off the coast of South Africa, who were off the coast of Mauritius. And they, brave Barbadian sons and daughters, had to find their way home because there were many who stood up and said, "Here I am, use me." And I'm talking in this instance about pilots. I'm talking about the cabin crew. I'm talking about the airport staff. I'm talking about the seaport staff. And those are just the persons who were at the boundaries. But what about those persons who, Mr. President, when we went into lockdown in March, all of us were at home, well, many of us were at home, and we could not go outside except on a given day. But there were people, Mr. President, who got up every single day, who for the first time had to wear masks, had to learn how to wear a face shield. And they went and they served us in supermarkets, in shops, in mini-marts. They stood up and they said, "Here I am, use me. I am willing to put myself on the front line." We had taxi drivers who took people from the airports to their homes, from the seaports to the airport. We had bus drivers, Mr. President. I recall one night standing in the Bridgetown port where 17 buses lined up next to a ship, windows down, space allocated on those buses, drivers dressed in full PPE, head to toe, the windows were down. We were still in the early stages of trying to figure out how this virus worked. And we stood there, and I remember standing at the time next to the British High Commissioner in the port, British Deputy High Commissioner in the port at around 11 o'clock that night. And those bus drivers, those taxi bus drivers stood up in an era where we were all fearful. None of them had lived through 1918, Mr. President. None of them had experienced the Spanish flu. This was something completely new. And they stood up, Mr. President, in circumstances where they did not know what to expect. And they said, "Here I am, use me." I want to commend in this instance as well the persons who worked in the Bridgetown port. We had people who were not there necessarily only dealing with individuals who had or were suspected of having COVID. We had persons who stood up, and at the time when you were not sure if COVID was only being transmitted by individuals or if it was on surfaces, and if it was on surfaces, how long it would stay on surfaces, they stood up and they unstuffed containers, they offloaded ships, and they made sure that our food and our supplies kept flowing off of the supply chain as we imported our goods into this country so that our people could eat, so our nation could produce. These are people who stood up and said, "Here I am." We had our immigration officers, our customs officers. We had our ground handlers. We had people who were collecting garbage and who did not know who had what in a household, and they were standing up and saying, "Here I am, use me." Mr. President, this is, I think, perhaps the ultimate triumph of the human spirit. There are teachers and caregivers who looked after our children and our elderly. They said, "Here I am, use me." And I want to take this moment, Mr. President, to commend the government of Barbados that I am a proud member of. Because large countries with more vast resources than we could even imagine struggled in a way that this country did not. We conquered things that large countries did not and still have not, Mr. President. We have been able to get through our Dos Santos laboratory test results 24 hours on average, and we are still certainly in the tourism industry dealing with countries that 5, 7, 10 days, they're still having challenges getting test results turned around. Mr. President, I am so proud of my nation. I am so proud of my people. We are masking up in a way that we never could have imagined before. The masks are our new accessories. But we are also looking after those who in some instances could not have looked after themselves. And this Humanitarian Service Award and this Gold Crown of Merit, Mr. President, says to those people, we see you, we recognize you, we appreciate you, we value you. This is who we are. This is the Barbadian spirit. This is the humanitarian spirit. And this is an indication of who Barbadians must always be in times of trial. We must always be those ones who stand up and rise to the occasion and say, "Here I am, use me." Now, there are those, Mr. President, who have attempted to use this occasion and this moment and this season for all kinds of things. They have not understood when it is the time to rise to the occasion. They are not among those for whom the Humanitarian Service Award is designed. They have tried to be rabble-rousing. They have tried to be instigators. They have tried to lit a fire where there are flames, largely because we are in the middle of a global pandemic and it has certain implications for everything that we do. They have not risen to the occasion, Mr. President. They have not demonstrated the kind of patriotism, integrity, maturity that has been required in this moment. But there are just a few. They are not the majority. They are not the majority even by a long shot. They are very much the minority, and I am so proud of our people and all that we have done. So, Mr. President, this award, which we are hoping to be able to give effect to in January, is just a small token of recognition. Mr. President, I happen to be a member of this administration, but I also happen to be, prior to even being here, a member of a service club called the Rotary Club. We have a motto, and it says, service above self. And as we live service above self, we say there is no greater service than doing for someone who can do nothing in return for you. There is no greater service. You expect nothing in return. They have no ability to give you anything in return. You have no special interests or constituency to serve. It is about service, and it is above yourself, not just your own self-aggrandizement, but your own self-interest. That is who we are. That is what I believe in, Mr. President. And this is what this moment has brought for us. Every service club in this country, Mr. President, stood up, gave hampers as the unemployment levels rose. We had every church community who was standing up and saying to their congregation, "Do you need help? How are you?" You had people who were volunteering to check in on the elderly. This is what this Humanitarian Service Award is designed for, Mr. President. And I want to use this opportunity to call on all Barbadians to use this moment of triumph, to use this moment of exaltation, to understand the significance of recognition. We have come to a place sometimes, unfortunately, Mr. President, where people say, "What's in it for me? What are they going to do for me?" That is how base sometimes our conversation can be. Because unless there is something in it for us, it has no merit. But that's not what service is. That's not what patriotism is, Mr. President, and that's not what this moment requires of us. The government of Barbados would wish to have an opportunity to give everyone the resources that they would love to be able to provide. We would love to, and I think the Prime Minister has made it clear that in collaboration with the Barbados labor community and the social partnership, there will be a discussion around what kind of gratuitous payment could potentially have been made, and she spoke about that in the other place. But even beyond a gratuitous payment of any kind, a one-time gratuitous payment of any kind, there is that satisfaction, there is that pride, there is that value which is intangible, which says, I know the challenges were there. I know the economic devastation which has wreaked itself on every single community, every single country, every single continent all across the globe. I know that, I see it. I don't live in a bubble. But I value the recognition at a minimum that I matter and that my service, however so rendered, matters. And I am looking forward to the development of those persons who have stepped forward in this moment, in our time of need, and stood at service to our country. And I want to commend this bill to this place, Mr. President. And with these few words, I'm obliged. I beg to move at this time that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummins. Senator Franklin.
Thank you very much, sir. I am not as effervescent as the good senator who just sat about the provisions of this bill. I have no difficulty with people being honored for service to this country or for service to anything else. But this is now the third or fourth bill, at least, where the government has created some award. And if this bill had been by itself, I would have no difficulty. But this seems to me to be the government trying to build a cult around the Prime Minister, and Prime Minister give you this, Prime Minister give you that, give you an award. She took the little school children the other day and she brought them to the gymnasium, exposed them to the dangers of getting COVID, to pin a prefect badge on them. I was a prefect at school too, and I was school vice captain at one stage, and nobody, they give me thing in my hand, I had to put it on myself. I didn't see the need for that type of thing, except, oh, the Prime Minister honored me this, or a few years down the road when I can vote for her. This is what this is all about, you know. This is building a following to get vote down the road. This is not about the service to the people. This is the Prime Minister taking care of herself and this thing. Or everything that we are doing here now could be achieved under current awards that we have. Barbados Service Star, whatever you actually do. But no, we have to have this one, and we have to have all the other ones that we passed recently, these two rather, because the Prime Minister sees a way of working this to her advantage. This is what this is all about. This is not to belittle the contribution that people have made, and I'm talking about those frontline workers who are not recognized. I can give an example. Senator Cummins spoke about the people who work in the supermarkets. They were not even recognized in pay. They work hard, they work long. You had lines stretching. I remember Price Mart had lines going right around Price Mart and meeting back at the end. You know, so the line looped the supermarket. Other supermarkets, and I will not call their names now because I'm going to talk something about them, and they don't really want to force them to defend themselves because they spoke something in here. People work hard, and then immediately after the place was open back up, I didn't do all these numbers and people coming in by letters and all kind of stuff. These supermarkets, they offer people instead of making the money. No, you believe that? You believe that these supermarkets, let me do something. I went and shopped at the supermarket, I never went in before in my life because I could get none of the others. And I passed and saw this one open, I went in, and they let me in and I bought a few things. Or not, I would have been suffering, me and Snow. Thank you. No, that was not purity. No, that purity, I went there on Monday. I haven't gone there on Monday because the fire the fellow went to get him reinstated. And the people purely took forms from me. And the next day, the other union started a strike. I don't understand this deterrent happened in recent times. What are we talking about? Oh, that is besides the point. Anyhow, that's not what we're talking about. I am grateful for the service of these people, but I think that the service should be rewarded with most matters. People work long hours. Some people didn't go home. See those people at the best, the Santos laboratory, those people are working flat out, testing for COVID. And they're working. I know one or two of them. And we're hearing about a one-time gratuitous payment. No, sir. I want a one-time gratuitous payment for these people. These people are entitled by law and by international conventions that the government signed on May 8, 1967, to pay them for work actually done. So if they work overtime, this is the Protection of Wages Convention that the government signed. Mind you, we were following that convention prior, but we actually committed ourselves to it when we became independent and signed the convention on May 8th, I think it is, May 8th, 1967. So people are entitled to be paid for work actually done. And these people are actually working. So one-time gratuitous payment will not suffice under the laws that we have. I remember hearing the Prime Minister saying recently when they had the G4S, they came to me too. And I had a strike as a result. I'm working these people too hard and I gotta stop. She said that she's not going to allow people to float the conventions, that Barbados signed up to. Well, Barbados signed up to the Protection of Wages Convention that says these people must be paid for work actually done. And they're actually working, so you give them a salary, and then one time down the road, you give them a one-hour payment, and then give them a low day. Low days happen in the public service, but it's contrary to the conventions that we signed. If you work, you get paid for it. Because I cannot take a low day into Cape Shepherd or Popular or whoever. I can't go in Popular and say, Mr. Hall, I had a low day, so you hold that for these goods. People need money, and they actually work for it. So yes, it is nice to give people these awards and stuff. Yeah, but they're going to get payment for it too. They need to be paid. The law said they must be paid. So don't just give me the thing and carry me up on this government house and they government job paying something on me and that kind of stuff. I want she paying a few Grantleys in my hand too, because that is what they did. They work, they actually work. And I didn't hear any of them talking about we're giving up or we're giving our service for the good of the country and stuff. Some of them got bills.
Mr. President.
I want to rise, Senator.
I rise on a point of order.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. President, I believe the Honourable Senator is misleading the House. I am not aware of any accusations of persons who worked during that period alleging that they have not been paid. And if they were not paid, Mr. President, they're not employed by the government of Barbados, they're employed by private sector employees. And if there's an accusation that the Honourable Senator would wish to make about persons who worked during that period not having their due entitlement in wages and salaries, well then he should say so. But I would not wish to have a continuation of the notion that the government of Barbados has any responsibility at all that it has not met for payment of private sector workers.
Sometimes you can really sit down and listen to what people are talking.
Please proceed.
It would suit your purposes to interrupt me when I'm talking because you don't want me to talk, but
please adjust the chair.
People I'm talking about are given low days from the government of Barbados. You work and you are given a day off for the time that you do. It is contrary to law. The practice in the public service, I'm not talking about supermarket workers with the low days. I'm talking about the supermarket workers when it came to they work hard, and then when the crisis abated a little bit, the people laid them off. I'm talking about two different things. You should listen sometimes rather than wait to see if you can find an opportunity to jump up. All right? These people, it isn't only the government that is abusing its staff, you know, it's the private sector people too. But the private sector people, yes, they are wrong, but government has a higher responsibility, and they must follow the law. Case in point, and I'm going to talk back up the G4S situation again. Government committed itself since 1952. The Labor Clauses, Public Contract Act. That government will not pay substandard wages. They will not contract with people who pay substandard wages. That's the law of Barbados, and it's been the law of Barbados since 1952. But it came out of an ILO convention that was approved in 1949. We signed it into our law. We passed it into our law. Government has a standard wage for their security people. But they will say, oh, we're paying industry wages at G4S and wherever else. The only people who had security personnel when these companies came into Barbados and started doing business was the government. The other fellow might have a watchman here and a watchman there and that kind of stuff, but the security firms, the only organized security was the government security service. And they paid people at Z3830, which is the bottom of the scale, and they went up for those 8 points over the over 8 years, and then they stayed there unless they became a senior security guard. So when government decided, no, we got to save some money and start employing contractors who pay a lot less than what the government, because the current wage that G4S pays, I worked it out somewhere, if I can remember correctly, over 40 hours, that would be $1,506 a month. Government security guards make $2,000 a month for 40-hour week, on top of 40-hour week. So those people, if they want to work at the private sector now, who want to work for a decent wage, have to work 12 hours. And government has encouraged that. Government is contracting with those people, and the government by law cannot legally do so. So, yes, we came up and we do a lot of little fancy things, and we jump up and we said, oh, we solved the issue and stuff. They didn't solve anything, you know. What they did, they pacified some people. But the wages still haven't gone anywhere near what the government by law is required to do. So that's one aspect of it. So when we give these awards and stuff, you see people, these security guards give service. You know, I have some security guards in my union. And when the hotels were shut down, they were at work. They had to be. So they worked through it, and some of them got harassed, not necessarily, I can't call it harassed, but they were walking the street, they get on their way to work, police pulled them over and all kind of stuff. Because the companies didn't do what was required and get the passes and that kind of stuff. You know, and they're sojourners, so they work too. And I'll tell you that some of them got into trouble because the companies did not provide enough security guards to serve the purpose. Because if you have a hotel running and fully booked, you have maids, you have porters, all kinds of management people and stuff walking around the hotel. And you have the security guards. Let's say you have 3. But each employee there now has eyes. So a thief will not go in front of one of the other employees and steal. Even though that's not a security guard. Somebody will see him. People went home, and the security guards were required to be on the property at all places all the time. I just went to a hotel on the West Coast represented security guard who could not be at 3 places at the same time. And some person went in there and stole something. They put him at the front gate and said, you're not supposed to move in the front gate. And somebody went down the back and thieved something and charged him. So the state, they bore a brunt of a lot of work too, but I ain't saying no, I ain't heard about calling them frontline workers, but they were frontline. Now they are, but the hotels have started to get people again, and the security guards are the frontline people again out there with the little thermometers and the alcohol. These are frontline workers too. So I hope when you're giving out these awards, you remember those fellas as opposed to the Prime Minister's friends, because these awards, I suspect, like all the other awards that we get, are going to be politically based.
On a point of order, Mr. President.
Yes, Senator Haynes, Dr. Haynes.
Once again, during his presentation, Senator Franklin has continued to suggest that there is improper motive behind the Prime Minister's decision to bring this bill to the House. And that's my objection to what he's saying. Our standing orders do not permit us to suggest that there's improper motive behind anything that any member does.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Haynes. Senator Franklin.
The proper motive is getting elected the next time around. So I'm not saying it's improper. I'm saying that's what you're doing.
You will take caution, though, that you will
yes, sir.
not impute.
Yes, I will not say that they're doing it, breaking any law.
To members of either House of Parliament in actions taken.
Sir, I'm well aware of the standing orders, and I'm grateful for your guidance. All I'm saying, sir, is that I'm not saying it's an improper motive. I said it's a motive. It might be proper to get elected again. And this is what these things are all about. You know, we have awards already that you can fit these people in. There's no need for this legislation. Mind you, if you want to increase the amount, that you can probably increase it by whatever means they do to increase those awards. But this is part of the building of the motley cult. You know.
Senator, I think that you're trespassing now on the standing orders, and I would want you to withdraw those statements.
Sir, well,
and have them struck from the record.
Sir, I will withdraw the whatever you ask me to do, sir. All along I'm thinking about it being a motley cult, but if you say not, sir, I will be guided by you.
Kindly withdraw them and they're struck from the record.
I do so without any reservation whatsoever.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Yeah.
Please proceed along the line that you know that you need to proceed.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't going to speak on this, but I get tired. I wasn't saying back saying that, and I say, so I'm going to make a main talk about this because we are hearing one thing, but there's another way of looking at it. Mind you, if you would look, if government had been looking at ways to do other things before in this place, you wouldn't have to be coming back so often. We need lots of changes to the laws of Barbados. We need the economy to be growing and stuff. There are things that we need to do. But right now we are here like Nero, fiddling while Rome burns. Will these awards find a single job for anybody other than the fellow that is making the pins? I think not. So government is, I don't know, I can't say wasting time, even though that was on my mind. We have things to do in this country to get this country running and going and get work for people. We have about, I understand, 50,000 people unemployed. That's my understanding. We're looking for work for them. But rather than coming here and bring initiatives to get work for people in this country, we're coming with these little feel-good things. I don't mind feeling good, but at the same time, they must not be the priority. But they have been elevated to the more, or the most important business because they get passed in one day, rush through Parliament like it's an emergency. What is so emergency about this? I don't know, sir. I'm asking. You know, but what I'm saying to you is, before I was interrupted earlier, that the cabinet will determine who get these things, who get these awards. What is the process? Can I nominate Senator Greenwich and say, well, he's been a good fella and I want him to get one? Who will do the nominating? Or will it be like each MP gets 20? I don't know. Because I've heard that I have been nominated for national. A fellow told me, I laughed. I said, boy, that will not happen in 100 years. But you take the ones that you want. And if you look, you will see most of the people who get awards in Barbados, unless it has something to do with their job, they have political connections. I'm not talking about only in this administration. I'm talking about every other administration. We have people who get knighthoods and whatever else they get, not because of any tremendous work in the country or for anything else. They get them because they're favor. And in one case, I know of one person who begged for his. You know, when I spoke with the chairman of the committee who vetted him, and I asked him, oh, you could get so-and-so a recommendation for award. He said, me? Not me. He put up a list, and the Prime Minister took it along, and he begged for one Prime Minister. I'm not going to call his name because he's very prominent, and I'm saying somebody begging me not to say anything. So I'm not going to call his name, but you beg for them. So, what? Sir, recognize the people, but there are other mechanisms available to recognize the people who give service in this country. It happens every year. Why this bill? As I said, and I'm not going to say any cult again because that was frowned upon, and I will not do that, sir, to you. So what are we doing, though? Is it to, I can't find another word, to give people the impression that, oh, this is the person who bestowed this on us, so we have to vote? We've got to be careful what we're doing in this country here. We cannot afford personality politics to the point where somebody becomes the beginning, the middle, and the end of everything. I see it in cabinet where cabinet ministers, except for one or two, speak. The Prime Minister speaks for them. All the others, I don't know if they can speak or she don't allow them to speak. So no, she is taking over the role of everything else. But, you know, we have awards. We're rushing through Parliament today one day to pass a bill. What's the urgency, sir? I am still baffled. But I'm going to be happy for anyone who gets an award for the service they give. Trust me, I want them to get paid too. Because an award on your bosom does not put food in the belly. I want government, and I'm going to finish by this by saying I want government to recognize, as the Prime Minister said, that she's not going to allow people to float the conventions that we signed upon. If they don't pay these people for work, actually, then they are floating them as well. The government will float them as well. I want people to get paid for work actually done. Yes, they went out there, and some of them did it through love of country and love of people and all kind of thing else. But at the same time, they work, and they should be paid. I'm much obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Franklin. Senator Wiggins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for the opportunity to speak very briefly on the Humanitarian and Gold Awards. The acting leader of government business spoke very eloquently as she introduced this bill. And Mr. President, I don't think you were here at the time, but she was chairman at the Barbados Port Authority. And she herself needs to be thanked. I don't know if she would get one of the awards. She did an exceptional job as chairman. Yes, the acting leader of government business today. She did an exceptional job, I'm telling you, as chairman of the Barbados Port Authority, where even when we were trying to get those 22,000 visitors from the airport, she was so intimately involved and being on the ground in conducting the affairs of the port. I think also, as well as when we introduced the new Asikuda world system, she was there guiding the controller and members of that port when we were changing over the new system. So, Mr. President, we don't thank people, we criticize a lot. And today, again, I want to publicly thank the acting leader of government business, who was so instrumental during those cruel times, and the work that she has done. You know, Mr. President, I think too the introduction of these awards is an excellent idea, because all those persons who worked on the front line during the pandemic, they feel good to know that they have been recognized. To get these awards, a thank you, they're going to get a pin, I understand, and some cash in time for Christmas. And I believe that this is such an extraordinary way to acknowledge these people. And in the independence celebrations, when we were in Heroes Square, when the citations were being read for the persons, when you heard about the members of the Barbados Defense Force who climbed 40 feet in the air to go into those ships, Mr. President, to take swabs from those, the people that were there, those sick people, in those really rough times when it wasn't really told to us what was going on behind the scenes, but it was really, really rough. I'll be honest with you, at one point, I think the Prime Minister and some members of her cabinet went on board a ship. I was so scared. So there was so much work to do that was going on, Mr. President, behind the scenes, and I really feel that it is a great idea to acknowledge and reward people. We talk a lot about all the swabs that were being taken. The Best Dos Santos lab. Those people work night and day, as we will say, day and night, to test all those samples that came to them, Mr. President. And I feel, like I said, I don't know who are getting the awards, but the people at the Best Dos Santos lab should be rewarded. Even the people, Mr. President, I will tell you, the Prime Minister had the foresight to build that isolation unit in St. Lucie. And that unit in St. Lucie went up in record time. And the contractors, those contractors should also be rewarded for the excellent work. I think it's a 100-bed unit that we have there in St. Lucie. And that was built just in case this pandemic got out of hand. I mean, Mr. President, these are extraordinary circumstances. It was not a Barbados issue, it was a worldwide issue. And in those early days, Mr. President, it was dread. It was really dread. And you really have to thank the Prime Minister for her exceptional leadership during these cruel times and when this pandemic was on. The Minister of Health, the good soldier that he is, Mr. President, led the CMO and the Ministry of Health. Again, it was exceptional. And I really feel that awarding people, you know, you really have to thank them, you have to reward them for the good work they did in those trying circumstances. All of us in here listen to CNN every day, listen and watch CNN. Certain countries in the world now struggling to implement protocols, Mr. President, that Barbados had implemented from day one. A lot of people resisted. There was a lot of resistance in Barbados in those early days when we could only leave home by, our surnames. But we had to lock down the country. In the UK, they call it circuit breaker lockdown, and only open up bit by bit when you had a little bit more knowledge, Mr. President, of what was going on in this country, Barbados. The supermarkets, the people were struggling, they were overburdened, and I do believe that most of the awards are probably going to supermarket workers and bus drivers, those people that the Honourable Acting Leader mentioned that were in full PPE driving those buses down to the port. Those people have to be acknowledged. I understand it's going to be a one-time award, but I honestly think it is a good thing. People need to feel good within themselves. They didn't do it because they were forced to do it, Mr. President. They did it because, as our leader said, here I am. I'm ready for service. I know one of the ministries that have not been talked about a whole lot during this pandemic, Mr. President, is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I can tell you, a couple ambassadors contacted me, and I had to be dealing with my Minister of Foreign Affairs, who, as you would know, Mr. President, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Foreign Affairs is integral to the whole economy of Barbados. And I can tell you that my Minister of Foreign Affairs was stretched out. I know because I was interacting with him, Mr. President, he was fully stretched out. And I can tell you he was Minister of Health. You would know that. When we had the SARS experience a few years ago, and his leadership helped Barbados through that trying time. And I can tell you now, because I know nobody tell me, he knows when many ambassadors contacted me about shipments. I dealt with my permanent secretary in the Prime Minister's office. I dealt with the Best of Santos lab. And my Minister of Foreign Affairs probably got tired of hearing me when he was dealing with other wider issues. And I'm seeing here today, he's not president, but he also went way beyond the call of duty. And I believe the whole country sincerely thank him for his intervention in these, when times were rough. And when times were rough, Mr. President, and we welcome our hard-working Minister of Foreign Affairs. I had him on television yesterday dealing with my issues with Suriname as well, and I can tell you he works exceedingly hard, Mr. President. Also, in terms of these awards that are being given out, there's this lady on the highway that I buy all my fruits and vegetables from. She said to me, you have to thank the Governor General for giving my mom an award, the 92-year-old vendor from St. Joseph. And to me, yes, and to me, I would tell you, she got an award at 92. The guy, Alistair Alexander from Barvin, who was out in the vineyard a long time, as you know, Mr. President, he got an award. Those people feel good for being awarded for their services that they have been out there, working a long time, and because normally people would think that, high-ranking people are the only ones who got award. But, Mr. President, I am very happy, and I think it's a pleasure and a privilege, Mr. President, that many persons are going to be awarded. Like I said, I don't know who the category of persons are, but they probably will be supermarket workers, bus drivers, people, medical personnel, the BDF, the police, who were instrumental and on the front lines, and the Parliament of Barbados, who introduced the various legislative measures to make sure that we in Barbados remain safe. And thank God, I would say that because we are so obedient, we listen and we obey the protocols, that today many of us are safe and we can go around this country. So we want to thank the Prime Minister and the entire Cabinet for keeping the country of Barbados safe and for recognizing and awarding those people who were working and gave their lives while on the front line this award. So, Mr. President, with those few words, I am obliged to you and I'm happy to support this legislation today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Liggins. Senator Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President, for recognizing me. I shan't be very long, but I just wanted to say that I think we have a lot to be thankful for in this country, Barbados. We have to be thankful that we have gone through this pandemic in terms of the health systems, be relatively unscathed. Most of the incidents of virus, as we know, in Barbados were imported cases. And I think it reflects a number of things that we in Barbados have been able to do. First of all, Mr. President, I think leadership was a key ingredient. And I want to make that point because I listen quite a lot, and I follow the international news services, CNN, BBC, NBC, etc., etc. And when you recognize and when you get and when you recognize how little Barbados and other countries in the Caribbean, with the few resources that we have been able to keep ourselves safe. And we compare that with the reports we get out of North America, where the leadership, according to the experts, all the experts keep insisting there was lack of leadership, and that thousands of deaths could have been avoided if there was strong leadership in that state. So I think we have a lot to be thankful for, and particularly I would like to single out here in Barbados the Minister of Health. Not only because he's a Commonwealthian, of course, but and we expected, of course, that he would pull his weight. But whenever I see or hear the minister these days, there's a phrase that comes out, which was, I think, no surrender, no retreat. And that is the first thing I always seem to think of when I see the minister. And, you know, subconsciously, I wonder if many of these frontline workers and people of whom we are here looking to generate some awards for under this act, I wonder if that slogan, no surrender, no retreat, may not have worked as a rallying call to all of the frontline workers who we saw working so hard, doing things that normally they would not be called upon to do, making sure that they did what was necessary to keep this country safe. We would have heard some of the various people who would have been in the forefront of the fight. Of course, we recognize the medical personnel. We would, of course, recognize the And I want to make this point to even people like the SAR. These are all part of the leadership, for example. You know, we had a kind of a love-hate relationship, I think, with the SAR. We didn't like when he said, for example, you know, Barbadians are hard-eared people. But we recognized that he was doing a very important job. He knew what he was doing, and he was making sure that whatever was necessary to keep this country safe, he was prepared to implement it. So I want to join in the congratulations. I think I should also mention our Prime Minister, who at the time we all know was undergoing some medical care. But I remember particularly one evening, one day, you know, sometime when she actually, as we in Barbados would say, got up off of her sick bed and came out to address the Barbadian public and to rally them with her charm, as only Prime Minister Motley can do, to make us all feel, understand that it was a sacrifice we were making, but the importance of that sacrifice, Mr. President. And I think those two, I don't want to obviously list the whole litany of persons, but those two, among all the other people, we have the present Minister of Tourism, Senator as well, who would have played a part in terms of, at the time, assisting in facilitating for the cruise, those cruise lines, to make sure that we assisted, and they played a very humanitarian role in getting all of the staff off of the cruise lines back to their respective destinations during that time of the lockdown. So in no small measure, everyone pulled their weight. I can think too of, for example, you know, the supermarket packers, those people who we normally don't even see very often when we walk into a supermarket to shop, and you know, it is only during this pandemic that we realize how important these people are, that every job has merit, every job is important. And that, you know, I went in, for example, we go into the banks and would normally pass the attendants cleaning and so on. And during this pandemic, and still going on now, we realize that, you know, what they were doing in terms of every customer, after every customer, you see them go up and they clean and sanitize the counter and so on. So that they too were doing their part in making sure that we kept the spread of the virus down. And they all have to be congratulated. And I also want to congratulate the staff, particularly the house parents at the Child Care Board, because I think they did quite a lot. They're not often mentioned, not necessarily known for what they would have done, but I am thinking particularly, Mr. President, of those house parents who went beyond the call of duty, who had in many cases to double up shifts, who worked 2 shifts in order to make sure that those children in care were always well looked up. And I understand from some of the feedback that I've got that in some ways they benefited as well, because remember this was a time when we were trying to manage with some e-learning. And so they had to help out, in some cases, the children under their care in order to be able to do their lessons online. So there I have feedback saying, well, look, we learned a lot as well. We learned how to Google. We learned how to do this. We learned how to better use the computer in terms of helping to our kids, for which we have care, to be able to manage during this time. So, Mr. President, when I was looking at reviewing the bill, I believe it was yesterday or sometime, I said to my wife, you know, it is a pity that perhaps for this situation, we know that government is really under tight strains because of the reduction in revenues coming in. It is really a bad time, but it would have really been good if some sort of little Christmas monetary gift or something could have been given to all of these people who work. And so it was who did their part during the pandemic. And so it was good to hear, I think Senator Cummings mentioned it, that there is some plans to have some sort of ex gratia award. I don't know how it will work, but that is important because I think there are a lot of people who will not necessarily be recognized. The Prime Minister in this amendment to the Act has the unenviable task, according to this Act, of recommending the persons for the award. And I trust she will be guided and take advice from many others, because there are so many people who will fall under this and that should of necessity be recognized for what they have done. So everybody, unfortunately, will not get this award, but I think doing something like this little gift, monetary gift, will certainly reach a lot more of those folks who have worked hard and diligently to keep this country safe. I also want to mention under some of the persons who would have worked very hard. I think of those people who who would have been working at the best Dos Santos lab. And, you know, every day when you hear the reports of the number of cases, you hear out of the 400 and X amount of tests that were done, out of the 500 amount of tests that were done yesterday. And, you know, I wonder how those lab technicians manage. It meant, as far as I can see, that they were probably working some very long days and nights. And they are the people who we need to, these are all the types of people who need to be recognized. You know, these days, Mr. President, we hear a lot of the phrase, there's a lot about heavy lifting to be done. These people, in my view, Mr. President, are the ones who really have done the heavy lifting and continue to do so during this pandemic. And therefore, I am pleased and happy to be able to support these amendments and to support these awards. Just one last little point I would like to make, Mr. President, and it's this. And when I say we, I'm speaking of Barbados and countries like Barbados, will probably will fall very low on the totem pole in terms of getting access to the vaccine, which has just been approved. And I understand, I think yesterday, another one was approved. But the point is that we are not going to be given priority, and so it's going to be still some time, I think, and I may be wrong, I don't know what arrangements the government has in place, but I suspect it will still be some time, probably not before the second quarter of next year, where we may have access. The point I want to make, Mr. President, is that I think we still need, whenever we can, to remind our Barbadian friends that we are still struggling and fighting through this virus. We still have to keep our guard up, particularly during this time of the year, and I suspect this week and in the coming week, as we approach the Christmas holiday, there will be lots of more activity in terms of shopping and so on. But I just want to remind all of us that whatever we do, we still need to be careful. And we still need to keep our guard up. And even when the vaccine gets here, I think we will still need, because it's going to be so important to make sure that we continue not only to make sure our people in Barbados are safe, but that the people who are coming in, our visitors and so on, are coming in either vaccinated, or we may have to look at the protocols which we have in place and perhaps revise them now that the vaccine is available. And just the last thing I would mention, Mr. President, is the necessity, I think, of making sure, as of now, that we start to sensitize Barbadians about the vaccine. I don't think we have had many difficulties in the past of people accepting vaccines. But the point is that this is something new. We don't know about it. There's obviously going to be some hesitancy among folk as to whether or not it is safe and so. And I think that because we have this window right now where the vaccine is available overseas, but there's some time before we can get it, we can monitor that situation, we can see what is happening, and we can use that as an opportunity to sensitize our own Bajan folk of the importance of making sure that they become immunized, and that we, as I said, will continue to keep ourselves safe. And with those few words, Mr. President, I am obliged to you.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I beg to move that this sitting be now suspended until 2:45 to allow for lunch.
Until 2:45 p.m. Those in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The sitting is now suspended.